And welcome everyone. Glad you are all able to make it here today. My name is Dan Tiernan. I am the Chief Operating Officer for Campbell and one of the 5 owners of the company. I'm also a licensed CAM, and I work closely with many of our association clients on some of the more complex issues they may face from time to time, like electric vehicle charging stations. So for those of you that are not familiar with Campbell, we've been in business since 1953. That's 10 years before I was even born, and manage over 400 HOA and condo association clients between Dade County up to the Treasure Coast. And we are proud to be South Florida's highest rated property management company. So one little quick disclaimer, just a reminder, this webinar is for information purposes only and not legal advice. If you require specific legal advice to your community, you should reach out to your attorney. Also, I am not an electrician. I love electricians. They do great work, but I'm not one. So ultimately, you're going to need an electrician to help you develop a plan that works specifically for your association. We'll talk a little bit about some of the questions you might need to have them help you address. Also, I'll tell you that less than 15% of our condo clients have installed EV charging stations. It's not because we haven't encouraged them, but it hasn't happened yet. So this webinar is really for those 85% that have not installed charging stations. If you've already installed an EV charging station at your property, this might be a little bit too basic for you, but you're still likely to learn a few things as we go along. So I encourage you to stay. It's only going to be for 30 minutes. So our goal today is to make you become smarter about electric vehicle charging stations in condos. So the key questions we plan to address today are, number one, as a board, do we have to do this? Number two, what is the owner responsible for? Number three, is this something that we really even have to worry about? Is it imminent and we have to deal with it, or can you just kind of kick the can down the road? Number four, what does it cost to set up and what are the ongoing costs? Number five, who's going to pay for all this? Real important question. Number six, what choices do we have to make? Number seven, what is the scope and scale of the project? And number eight, how do we track the costs and actually charge owners that might be taking advantage of this new amenity? Also, I'll tell you that we are primarily focused today on condos because it's a little more complicated in condos because of the shared living situation. And in HOA, for the most part, most HOAs, each homeowner can generally handle it themselves without association involvement, unless maybe you're going to have like a common area charging station in your clubhouse area, for example. But even if you're in an HOA, there still might be a few things you can learn today. But again, it's focused primarily on condos. So just to be transparent, I have a strong bias towards electric vehicles. I own a Tesla, and this is a picture of me with my Model 3. His name is Silver. Silver's been part of the Campbell family since the summer of 2019, almost 3 years. I charge him at home once or twice a week. We actually have a charge point at our office as well, but I rarely use it because it works just at home easier. So why don't we, Ashley, can we check our survey real quick just to see how many of our webinar participants actually own electric vehicles?
Sure thing. I'm going to share the results right now. Can you see that?
Yes. So it looks like we have 8% of the audience members here own an electric vehicle, 9% plan to own one this year, and 83% are no. So that's interesting. So I remember we did this about a year ago, similar webinar, and it was 7%. So it really hasn't grown a whole lot in the course of a year. So, all right, moving on. So regardless of my personal enthusiasm, there is a clear growth trend for sales of electric vehicles in the United States. This chart over here on the right, it shows you here that in 2021, about 1 of 30 new cars sold were electric vehicles. And 5 to 6 years from now, around 27, 2028, like 1 out of every 5 vehicles sold will be electric. And this great rate of growth has been changing, accelerating a lot over the last few years. So this is absolutely going to be trendy. This trend is going to create a need for a new amenity, a condominium that was never thought of before, and those are EV charging stations. So let's talk a little bit more about how this impacts you at your condo. So do condo boards need to accommodate electric vehicles? The answer to this is very clear. Yes, boards have an obligation to accommodate owner requests. However, the accommodations can be charged to the owner. Now, I'm not going to read through this whole Florida statute here, but I'll send it to you. We'll send it to you along with the presentation. And a few key points to remember here are the condominium association can't prohibit it. They have to enable it, but they can establish the standards. They can require owners to pay for it and require owners to pay for everything related to it, because there's a lot of safety and infrastructure potentially issues, or maybe very easy, maybe a lot more complicated, just depending on what your situation is. So the bottom line, though, is condos need to be prepared to enable it. And honestly, it's up to the board, and the board can do things to make it really easy, or honestly, they can make it hard if they like to. So let's talk about a few basics to make sure we're all on the same page, especially given that 92% of you don't actually own an EV. Just a few things that are important to understand. There are 3 types of EV charging that are available out there. So level 1 on the left here, that uses your standard electrical outlet. You plug your clock or light into these kind of 110-volt sockets, and it can take up to 24 hours or more to fully charge your car with this. It's commonly referred to as a trickle charge. And the challenge with this is, if you don't drive very much at all, it might work for you, but for most people, it's just too slow. And then on the opposite end of that are these level 3 chargers. These are the Tesla charging stations you find at Wawa or the Turnpike, or maybe a charge point at a grocery store. These are super fast. They can take less than 30 to 40 minutes to fully charge your car. Unfortunately, they are very expensive and very expensive to set up for electricians. It'd be almost like having your own gas pump at home. It's just not practical. Which brings us to level 2 charging, which is just right. So you can fully charge your car in under 8 hours. And if you look at what the picture of the outlet looks like, this NEMA 1415 plug, what does it look like? It looks like your dryer outlet, and it is. It's a standard 240-volt outlet. It's not complicated or expensive to install. So in general, this is what you should be looking for at your condominium association. Level 2 charging capabilities. So since many of you don't have an electric vehicle or charging stations at your properties, here are a few other things you should know. First of all, most drivers of EVs charge their cars 1 to 2 times a week, and they do it overnight. The average cost to charge an EV in South Florida is like $30 to $40 a month, based on the kilowatt hours and the, assuming people drive about 1,000 miles a month. And then most people are charging it at night for 2 simple reasons. It's, well, really 3. It's convenient. It's number 0. Number 1 then is that, they can do it while you're sleeping. And also electricity is actually cheaper at night, which a lot of people didn't realize. And that's why the cost is, that's why the cost per month is pretty low. And then one last final thing is, it's interesting, not everyone knows the vast majority of Tesla owners like myself don't like their cars. They love their cars. So this is a thing a lot of people are really passionate about. And I think you're going to see a lot more enthusiasm, not just about Teslas, but about all the other cars, electric vehicles as well. So there are 2 basic approaches to addressing the need for EV charging stations. And, you can either have common area stations that are shared by multiple owners, where it's kind of a first come, first serve. No one's got a dedicated spot and so on. Or you can go with personal charging stations that are for the exclusive use of a single owner at their designated parking spot. So let's kind of talk a little bit more about what this means. So installing common charging stations. So again, like I said, they're typically on a first come, first served basis. If you've got a group of spots, the hardest part for this sometimes might be just finding a spot to do it. Do you have a group of spots or an area that you could make available to have this common area charging station? So we've seen some of our condos have changed a few of the guest spots to charging spots. Others have used car washing spots, because people typically clean their cars during the day and they charge them at night. So you can actually make both of those things potentially work together. And then many condos install what are called like smart chargers to handle this. These smart chargers, let owners know if spaces are open or being used. They limit the use to only authorized users, and they track the amount of electricity used by each user, and they handle all the billing on a month-to-month basis. So here's a really simple example of a shared charging station in a condo that we manage. It's an EverCharge smart station. This is what it looks like. And there's actually two of them right next to each other that multiple owners share. And as I mentioned earlier, owners have an app on their phone. It shows them if they're available, if they're currently being used, and then it tracks the usage and bills the owner on a monthly basis. So Ashley, can we check the next question on the poll here? I wanted to see how many of you have installed these common area charging stations in your condo associations. Do you have the results of that?
Yep, I do. It looks like 7% have yes, they have. 12% plan to in 2022 and 82% no.
Okay, so it's still about 80% don't have them still. A few people are planning and so on. So last year when I asked the question, all right, do you have either personal or common? We had the answer was 11%. So it doesn't look like we're having a huge uptick yet, but it's definitely increasing. So the other option, so our personal charging stations. So these are exactly as they sound. A charging connection is run to an owner's designated spot for that owner's exclusive use. So if you don't have common areas you can use, or if there's only a few users that are asking for EV charging, this can be a really simple solution. Some owners actually want to have their own charging point because that way they don't ever have to worry about sharing, and the cost is not typically prohibitive, so it actually can make sense. So the simplest way to set up a personal charging station is to install what looks like I showed you earlier, like a dryer outlet in your garage. And these weatherproof NEMA 1450 240 volt outlets cost less than $50 for an electrician. And this is what it actually looks like in a wall. It's this simple. And then here's another example of in a condo where someone connected a Tesla wall charger into their NEMA 1450 plug. So this can be, it's a lot simpler than I think some people realize it is. It requires an electrician, but it's not a complicated thing. So Ashley, can we check the final poll question here and see how many owners have installed personal charging stations in their condominium associations?
Yep, so we're at 19% that have.
Okay, great. Yeah, yep, so it's, I think, go ahead. 7%
that plan to in 2022.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I guess we really have gone up quite a bit, because last year the number between personal and common was only 11%. And this year it's, when you add the two numbers together, what was the first one? I think it was
19%, 19% and 7% that plan to.
Yeah. Right, yeah, so it's gone up quite a bit, so that's great. Okay, so regardless of which route you go, whether it's common area stations or personal stations, there's a lot of things you need to consider. So you may need to upgrade your electric panel that connects to your EV charging stations. So it's important to think about the location, and this is where you need an electrician to come in and help you figure out, do you have a panel that's available, that is accessible and available and could allow you to not have to run the wire in too long of a distance out to the points, so to the charging points that where you would like to set them. So, and it, depending on your infrastructure, you may even end up needing an engineer to do load calculations. And you absolutely need to check with your local city or town regarding regulations to see if you need a permit or if there are certain requirements you need to adhere to. I think a lot of the cities have been enacting these over the last year or so, where there really wasn't much about it in the past. Okay, so the cost of this initial investment to prepare the electric panel, there may be no cost at all. You might have, like we had a situation in one condo where they had a lot of boat docks, and they had previously had run electricity out there, and that was really not being used. And we had a lot of people that wanted to put EV charging stations now, so there was a lot of capacity in that panel. So they're able to use that panel without any cost upgrades whatsoever. It was really just a matter of running some wire away from that. But don't, running the wire is might be a little bit more than you would expect. I mean, it's, definitely in the hundreds of dollars, but can easily exceed $1,000 if you're, more than 100 feet away from where you need to run it to. Because and the prices have gone up dramatically over the last couple of years because of the cost of copper, just as a raw material. And also you got to keep in mind that smart charging stations, can cost $1,200 to $3,500 per station, meaning per point. But personal charging connections can be a lot less than that. It's easy to keep them under $1,000, or if it costs you $1,000 to do it, it's going to cost you another $1,200 to $3,500 to put the system on top of it. So another thing to think about is, does the condo pay for the initial work, or do the owners do it? It just all depends on how your board thinks about this. Do you want to think of it as a potential amenity, if it's a common area charging station, so that it's attracting more owners and increasing the value of the community? Or is it something that you're having to accommodate and you want to charge the owners for? So, just a couple examples. If there's one person asking for it and it costs $2,000 to set it up for them, then I think the easy thing to do is set it up for them as a single dedicated personal charging station and charge them the $2,000. Most people that buy electric vehicles understand there's going to be some cost to this setup, and it's part of the cost of buying the car. And just the amount of money they're going to save not buying gas, they'll get over $1,000 a year returned easily. But on the other hand, if you have a larger condo, maybe you think you're going to need 10 EV charging stations in the next 2 or 3 years. You may need to configure electrical panel to handle 10 personal charging stations, or a common area station. Suppose that costs $9,000. You could, for example, charge everyone $1,000 as they are set up to eventually recoup the cost. Or again, like I said, the condo can fund the new amenities. Lots of different ways to do this, but you don't have to bear the brunt of it 100% by the condominium members. You can charge it back to the owners. Now down to the actual steps of what's involved to install a common charging station. It's pretty straightforward. First, you'll need to pick a service provider. I would, if you're going to have a smart charging station, I would suggest these are just 3 of the examples: EverCharge, ChargePoint, EV Box. There's so many more. They're constantly coming out and they're constantly evolving. And I would never recommend one over another because it's just changing so fast. So you need to do your own due diligence there. And then that service provider may have an electrician that they would recommend that understands their product that you could use, or the electrician that you normally use. It's really, these are not very complicated installations. So you could go with someone that's recommended by your service provider or your electrician that you normally use for the building. So, but the electrician is going to have to help you figure out, where's the best place to put this, what kind of a connection requirements are they're going to be, and then actually physically getting these stations installed. You may end up having to do a little bit of concrete work. All kinds of things could happen depending on where you're going to have it. And then ultimately, it all needs to get, you need to connect up the station, then you need to connect it to the electrical panel. With regards to charging the owners, typically most condos will charge some portion of the installation expense to the owners, just to kind of help recover the cost over time. Others haven't. They've just considered a condominium expense. And then if you've got a system in place, your owners can subscribe to the service provider offering. The association can set it up to charge like a surcharge on the actual cost, help make sure they recover everything. And then the owners pay service providers on a monthly basis, and they make some profit from this. It's a little bit more expensive on a day-to-day, month-to-month basis to have this system, but then you get the costing and the billing all taken care of. You don't have to worry about it. And then the service provider actually pays the condo for the electric usage based on what they've monitored and they've measured. So that's kind of generally how it works. And then from the standpoint of if you're going to go with just personal charging stations, say you just have one or two people that want to have their own dedicated charging station, you know, keep in mind, you know, this is the most simple possible charging station. This is at a condo that we had where someone asked to have this enabled. So they installed this NEMA 1450 240 volt outlet, which again looks like a dryer outlet outside with a weatherproof box. And they got this thing put in for $1,500 to get it. Although the biggest cost was running the wire and getting it to a location nearby to the panel outside. So, and then this is a more sophisticated personal charging solution that's a little bit faster and more efficient. It's a Tesla wall charger. So again, but this is just plugged into one of these NEMA 1450 outlets. And it goes a little faster. It has a few more features to it, but it's just for your own personal use. The scenario is pretty much the same, you know, here, but instead of starting with the system, you typically would, you know, hire an electrician, typically someone that knows your building really well, that's your standard electrician, or someone else that's done, if they don't, maybe they can recommend someone that they know that's done a lot of EV work. But again, it's not that complicated. More and more electricians are getting into it now. But they're going to need to help you figure out the location, identify the connection requirements, install the charging point, and connect everything up to the electrical panel. Again, these things are not that complicated, but they can take a while from a permitting and approval standpoint. So don't necessarily assume it's going to be the actual labor to get it done is not that complicated, but sometimes getting the permits and approvals and everything can be a challenge. And then, you know, the next step there is figuring out how you're going to charge the owners. Do you charge them a one-time fee, just like with the common area charging station? And then you have to figure out how you're going to charge them for this. So again, the cost of $30 a month is fairly small. So if you just were to round it up and do an average of $40 a month or $45 a month, or charge them $50 a month to recoup the initial installations cost, there's a lot of things you can do like that most people will be pretty flexible on, because the cost savings of just having an EV are pretty dramatic as compared to paying for gas. So one other thing to consider here is this is kind of a super simple common charging station. We've had a few condos do this, and this is a picture of one where they wanted to keep it really simple and stupid. So there were 3 or 4 owners that, you know, didn't drive a lot, that wanted to have an EV charging point. So they said, well, let's just make a common one and we'll put it outside. We'll have a designated spot. And this is what they have. And this is a picture of it. It actually has a lock on it that has a little combination, and the 3 or 4 of them that have access to it are the only ones that can use it because it's locked. And then they pay the same amount per month for this right, you know, which is $30 or $40 a month, which exceeds what the electricity cost is. So, and part of the reason they wanted to do this, they said, well, wait a minute, do we really want to spend $5,000 on a complex system when we're talking about electricity usage of $30 a car a month? You know, these things are probably going to advance a lot over the next few years. So they just felt like it was a lot easier to do it this way than to put in a sophisticated system. And again, I think a lot's going to change over the next few years. So I thought this was a pretty reasonable way to do it, given how early we are in the market for all this. So before you do anything, I think the smartest thing you can do is get a feel for the need in your condo. You can do a poll or a survey just to find out. Ask the questions that we asked earlier. Do you have an EV, or are you planning to get an EV? You know, get a feel for whether or not they're prepared to pay for it. You know, also assess kind of your locations and figure out, is there a demand for personal stations, or do you even have the ability to do common stations? You know, where are you going to put them, and how many are you going to put in place? And, you know, you're going to need to get some feedback from an electrician ultimately on whether or not you can do this. And I'll tell you, the vast majority of the properties we've worked with have been able to figure it out, but I've absolutely run into a few that have told me that it's going to be tens of thousands or $100,000 to get the additional capacity required to be able to make this all work. So that is it. Those, again, these are kind of the basics, and I've written some white papers on this, and there's some blog posts on our Florida Association news that you can check out, and Ashley will send you some information on that as well. But this should give you a good baseline understanding. And again, we're going to send all this information out to you. Ashley's put up a quick survey, and if you could spend a minute to do that, we'll reward 5 of you with a gift card for filling this out. We just want to get some feedback on the session today. And it looks like I've got a few minutes, so I'm going to look at some of the questions and answers here. Try to answer a few. So Pete asked, are there fire hazards for any at home or public ones, and how much for a pedestal station to be installed, who pays? I think I answered most of those, but are there fire hazards? Sure, anytime you have electricity, you've got a potential fire hazard if something were to go wrong, and that's the whole point of having an electrician, getting a permit, and making sure that everything's covered. And I'll tell you that I asked some insurance, condominium insurance agents, whether or not this has caused anyone's insurance to go up, and they told me it has not. They have not heard of that happening anywhere, because it's something they get asked a lot. Does anyone have a sample COI for an owner to provide under their individual insurance as an additional insured? Well, I would, yeah, that I don't think anyone's going to be able to help you here with that. But if you're with a Campbell, then I would ask your manager. They might be able to help you out. Who are the vendors in South Florida? I think I hit that. There's just an unlimited supply of vendors that do EV charging technology and stations, and then they will refer you to electricians or your preferred electrician. Again, this is not a complicated job. You should be able to help handle it. Kathy asked some interesting questions about golf carts. I've never really gotten into that. It's kind of the outside the scope of this, but you know, I think everyone knows you can kind of use your basic trickle charge for that. But it's I'm not sure how the law impacts that. We answered the questions about charging, who pays for the installations. Either the condo can, or you can charge it back to the owners. I gave us, there's some questions about prices for these things. So the pricing, I gave ballparks, but they're just, the pricing is all over the place depending on what you're putting in place. I'll tell you, like a charge point is a very sophisticated common area one where you can get two, they almost look a little bit like gas pumps. You can get them put in, for 2 charging stations. I think it was about $6,500 just for the equipment. And then, you're going to probably spend at least, $3,000 just to get them installed and the wire run to them as well, just to, again, to give you another price point option. But the ones I showed earlier that were on the wall, those things, are $1,000, $1,500 and can be used for common area as well. Can the association make any profit from the charging station? You're not really ever supposed to make any profit as an association, but you can make sure that you don't run at a deficit, and that's fair. But you really shouldn't be doing it to the point where you're making a profit. That's not the goal. Let's see. Do the power companies have any supporting infrastructure ready to support a major influx of EVs? I would say probably not. But I have talked to some people who have mentioned to me that they've heard about some vendors offering complimentary, not complimentary as in free, but complimentary as in works with the system batteries banks, so that could help manage the load. That if you had some bank of batteries that were loaded and you could be feeding them all the time, that could be used to charge the cars as well. Someone asked, what's a BEV and a BHEV? So that's a battery operated electric vehicle, and then a battery hybrid electric vehicle. So that they're just some new acronyms that people are starting to use, just trying to explain what kind of cars they are. I don't know about the cost in your county, but it's pretty easy to find out the kilowatt costs for, whether it's FP&L or someone else. So converting a guest spot, does this require a vote of owners or is it a board vote? That's a great question for your attorney. I'm not going to jump into that, but it may be a material change. But you don't, I know you don't, it's not a material change to add EV charging stations. You don't have to worry about that, but to remove a guest spot, it may. I don't recommend a particular charging company. Again, it's changes so much. It's hard to keep up with all of them, and I don't want to be on the hook for telling you which one you should use. So there was a question about how do you account for the increased electrical load? You hire an electrician to help figure it out. And the electricians know how to do this. And the one thing I think a lot of people overlook, the real common sense thing, is that the vast majority of this charging is happening at night. And that's, when the load is lower. So I think it's going to be less of an issue than most people think, but you might need some smart charging to that's where the smart charging can be useful, where it can kind of monitor the loads real time and make sure you don't overload anything. Okay, so anyway, I think I'm 2 minutes over, so I'm going to cut off at this point. I'm sorry I couldn't answer everything. We had a lot to cover in 30 minutes, so sorry we couldn't get to everything, but again, I'll be happy to answer questions that are generic if you like, but I can't answer all the real detailed ones. There's just so much of this, you just need to talk to your electrician, talk to the service provider. If you're with a Campbell managed property, we can help you out with this from a project standpoint. And, I think, Ashley, you make sure to send out maybe the white paper to everybody as well that we have on this. Just has a lot of the same information. That'll be great.
Yep, I'll include that.
All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. Again, like we said earlier, we're going to send you a lot of information out here at the end of this. And thank you so much for joining us today. We very much appreciate it, and good luck with your charging stations. And everyone have a great rest of the week. Bye-bye.